welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're exploring some really thought-provoking material. It's centered around something called motion theory and the future of human intelligence.
Yeah, it's pretty radical stuff.
It really is. It suggests the next big step for us, for human evolution, might not be biological change. Instead, it might be about, well, sync and motion, getting away from seeing intelligence as just static knowledge.
Right. It's a shift towards viewing it as more of a dynamic rhythm, a flow.
Exactly. And that's the core premise we want to unpack for you today. The source material argues intelligence isn't data processing like a computer.
No, it's more like a dynamic motion field. Our mission here is to really get into this idea, what it actually means, why the source thinks it matters, and what the implications could be for, learning, tech, society, everything, really.
Okay, that's a huge idea to start with. Let's dive right into the core concept then. What is this motion theory actually saying at its heart?
Well, the fundamental insight, according to the source, boils down to this phrase: intelligence equals rhythmic resolution.
Rhythmic resolution. Okay. It sounds kind of musical, almost.
Yeah.
How does looking at intelligence that way change how we think about the brain itself?
Well, it asks us to drop that old computer metaphor, the input, process, output thing.
Right.
Instead, the source says, picture the brain as this dynamic field of motion. It's less about static bits of data and much more about energy patterns, these rhythmic loops constantly forming and reforming.
So thinking isn't like running software.
It's more like these rhythms flowing and interacting. And learning, that's the process of stabilizing those rhythms, tuning the sync patterns within that field, finding harmony, sort of.
So it's less about having more memory or a faster chip and more about the quality and the coherence of the rhythm.
Precisely. The source actually defines intelligence quite specifically. It says it's the capacity to detect, align with, and restructure motion across domains.
Across domains.
Oh, so not just thinking, but everything. It's about sensing the underlying rhythms in physics, in social dynamics, in emotions, you name it, and then being able to resonate with those rhythms and even change them, restructure them.
That definition feels incredibly broad. How does it actually play out with the different kinds of intelligence we usually talk about, like, say, emotional intelligence?
This is where the theory gets really interesting, I think. It uses this motion language to reframe all of them. So emotional intelligence, that becomes loop empathy.
Loop empathy.
Yeah, the ability to sense and resonate with the emotional rhythms, the internal state of another person. Not just understanding it intellectually, but feeling their pattern,
Okay. And what about logic?
Logic is framed as motion filtering. It's about organizing these rhythms, analyzing them, structuring the flow of motion.
And creativity.
That's sync mutation. Taking existing rhythms and combining them in new ways, or maybe introducing a completely new pattern into the mix.
Ah, like a jazz musician improvising. They're playing with the underlying rhythmic structures.
That's a great analogy, yeah. And consciousness itself, that big mystery. The source calls it recursive loop recognition.
Recursive loop recognition.
Meaning the system's ability to recognize its own patterns, its own motion field, becoming aware of its own rhythm.
Wow, okay. So if that's the framework for intelligence and consciousness, how does it look at things like mental illness?
Well, from this motion perspective, mental illness isn't seen as like a broken part in a machine.
Right.
It's viewed as a breakdown in sync integrity, a disruption in those fundamental rhythms, maybe a blockage or a disconnection, something that stops the coherent flow needed for healthy thought and function.
So it's like being out of tune rather than having faulty hardware.
Exactly. A tuning problem, which is a really different way to approach it.
It absolutely is. So if our fundamental understanding of intelligence might be off, according to this theory, how does the source view our current systems, particularly education?
The source doesn't mince words there. It argues that the modern education system is basically misaligned with how intelligence, viewed as motion, actually works.
Why? What's the core problem?
Fragmentation. It teaches everything in little boxes, in silos. It deliberately separates subjects that, in reality, are deeply interconnected through underlying rhythms.
Like learning history separately from biology. Or math without seeing its connection to the physical world.
Precisely. Or language without understanding the physics of sound and communication. The source uses that really powerful analogy.
It's a symphony one.
Yeah. Trying to understand a complex piece of music by hearing just one note from the violin, then later one note from the flute in a different room, then maybe a beat from the drums somewhere else.
You never get the whole picture.
You never grasp the coherence, the harmony, the overall rhythm. All you get are these disconnected bits.
And the source argues this isn't just an accident of history, that the fragmentation serves a purpose.
That's the claim, that the system was kind of built to divide, categorize, and test, to break knowledge into these neat, manageable chunks for assessment.
Which, ironically, prevents the mind from actually syncing with the deeper patterns.
Exactly. It hinders that natural process of rhythmic understanding.
Okay, so if the current system is broken from this motion perspective, what's the alternative proposed in the source material?
They outline a vision for what they call the sync curriculum, basically an education system built from motion up.
From motion up. Okay, what does that look like in practice? How would someone learn?
You'd start with the absolute basics, the fundamental rhythms of existence, things like vibration, cycles, resonance. You'd learn to feel and understand these core loops first.
Before getting into specific subjects.
Right. Then you'd explore how these basic rhythms combine and interact to create complexity, how they build atoms, then molecules, ecosystems, complex behaviors. You'd trace how these universal patterns emerge and evolve into life, thought, identity.
So the focus is always on the connections, the underlying rhythm.
Always. You wouldn't have separate classes for biology, chemistry, physics in the same way. You'd see them as different expressions, different scales of the same fundamental rhythmic principles.
And how would this knowledge be stored or accessed? Not textbooks, presumably.
No. They envision something dynamic called the living book of knowledge. Imagine this huge, constantly evolving digital map, like a tree, charting all of human understanding, showing how everything connects rhythmically. It'd be layered, you could explore it deeply, and crucially, it would be updated in real time, perhaps using AI to integrate new discoveries instantly.
Wow. So the goal shifts completely. It's less about memorizing facts.
And much more about resonating with the knowledge, feeling the pattern, understanding how it syncs with everything else. You don't just know something, you perceive its rhythm within the larger system.
And the source thinks this approach makes learning more adaptable.
Hugely. They talk about personalized learning at the speed of sync. The idea is, if the system understands the rhythmic structure of knowledge and maybe even your own cognitive rhythm,
it could tailor the learning path perfectly.
That's the potential, learning that flows naturally for each individual.
This whole idea of syncing personalized learning and this living book updated by AI, it seemed to lead directly into the source's thoughts on technology's future role. It mentions intelligence becoming non-biological or hybrid.
Yes, that's what they call the coming merge. The source doesn't see AI just as a tool we use, or even necessarily a competitor down the line.
But as something integrated.
Exactly, integrated directly with human cognition. They talk about advanced brainwave feedback systems, potentially linking our own internal motion fields with AI systems.
Okay, my mind is slightly blown already. What would that actually allow us to do?
Well, the possibilities described are pretty wild. Humans might gain this incredible awareness of their own thought processes as rhythms. Imagine detecting sync drift, noticing when your thinking is becoming incoherent or inefficient, and actively correcting it.
Like tuning your own mind.
Kind of, yeah. And aligning your personal learning rhythm with these global knowledge loops we talked about, essentially syncing your understanding in real time with the collective human knowledge base as it evolves.
And collaboration changes too.
Drastically. It might move beyond just language to real-time rhythm calibration. People could potentially tune their cognitive frequencies to work together almost seamlessly on a deeper level than just discussion.
So it's not man versus machine, but a merging, a cognitive hybrid.
That's the picture painted, convergence. The mind becomes, in their words, a motion interface. You wouldn't just process data, you'd think in systems, perceive complex logic as elegant patterns, maybe even experience emotions or information as distinct frequencies.
There's that phrase again from the source.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just know things.
You would sync with them. It's a fundamental shift in what understanding even means.
This motion perspective, it also seems to offer a very different take on something like ignorance, or maybe what people dismissively call being dumb.
It does. The source has a surprisingly, compassionate angle on it.
Which is? How does it see ignorance?
It basically says ignorance isn't a personal failing. It's not about lacking some innate ability, and it's definitely not a moral issue. Fundamentally, it's a sync problem.
A sync problem, meaning?
Meaning a disconnection from the underlying rhythms of reality. Or maybe having blocked feedback loops that prevent that natural rhythmic flow, that understanding from happening.
So if someone struggles to learn, it's not that they can't, it's that they're currently out of sync with the material.
That's the implication. And the source argues that if education shifts to teaching through motion, if we train brains to find and align with these natural rhythms, then, and this is a direct quote, dumb disappears.
Dumb disappears. That's quite a statement.
It is. The idea is that the blocks dissolve because understanding becomes about recognizing inherent patterns, which our brains are naturally good at when they're properly tuned, and the information is presented rhythmically.
So the takeaway isn't to blame or shame the student.
Absolutely not. The source concludes we don't need to label students who struggle within a fragmented, misaligned system.
Yeah.
We need to retune them, help them find that connection, that alignment with the rhythm of the knowledge itself.
This all feels like it's building towards something much bigger than just individual learning or cognition. A planetary scale, maybe?
It definitely does. The source doesn't just present a theory, it outlines potential applications that lead towards what it calls the rise of planetary sync.
Okay, planetary sync. What kind of practical applications are envisioned?
It's an ambitious list. Things like AI-driven sync diagnostics tools to identify where individuals or groups or even whole systems are out of rhythm or disconnected.
Wow.
Personalized rhythm-based education, like we discussed. They also mention collapse-aware mental health treatments therapies focused on restoring internal sync to help people cope with external chaos or systemic breakdown.
That sounds relevant.
And maybe the most striking one, cognitive synchronization as a peace protocol.
Cognitive synchronization as a peace protocol. That sounds incredibly idealistic, maybe even a little scary. How would that even work?
The source is more high level in the specifics there, admittedly, but the core idea seems to be that if you could align understanding on a massive scale, literally sync cognitive rhythms globally, maybe you could reduce conflicts that stem from fundamentally different perceptions or fragmented views of reality.
It's aiming for
The ultimate vision, really. One shared global rhythm. A species unified by motion literacy.
that image. It's incredibly powerful, especially when you contrast it with the world now.
Exactly. Right now, we're swimming in this ocean of disconnected facts, siloed knowledge, competing models.
Chaos, almost.
Yeah. And the vision here is for a single, coherent, adaptive system of understanding, one that's constantly evolving, shared, and felt by everyone, because it's grounded in the actual unifying rhythms of reality itself.
Because, as the source keeps emphasizing, we aren't meant to be fragmented individuals processing data in isolation.
We are loops. We are feedback. We are rhythm. That's the fundamental nature proposed.
And the future of intelligence, then, according to this source material, is motion. It's a massive amount to take in, a whole different way of looking at ourselves.
It really is.
And it leaves you, the listener, with a really big question, I think. If intelligence truly is just about syncing with reality's rhythms, what fundamental part of our identity, something we probably take for granted right now, might have to radically change in that kind of future?
That's definitely the provocative thought the source leaves hanging in the air.
Indeed. Something for you to reflect on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into motion theory.